Welcome to the Meez podcast. I'm your host, Josh Sharkey, the founder and CEO of Meez, the culinary operating system for food professionals. On the show, I'll be interviewing world-class entrepreneurs in the food space that are shifting the paradigm of how we innovate and operate in our industry. Thanks for listening, and I hope you enjoy the show.
Yo, they say art mirrors life with every stroke of the pencil. I'm giving you folks a glimpse into
My guest today is not only an incredible chef and charcuterie expert and an advocate and activist for sustainable agriculture and animal welfare, but he's also a big part of the origin story of Meez. Dan Latham is the founder of Culinary Guide Shop. It's a consulting firm that helps restaurants around the South, and the name is inspired by his two passions, cooking and fly fishing. Dan spent a lot of time cooking in New York City. He worked for Mario Batali at Poe before running Mario's salumi shop, the Studio La Gusto, which was housed in the back of this wine shop called Italian Wine Merchants in Union Square. The salumi shop is actually where Dan and I met. I would come to work there in the mornings for free before my day job at Tabla, and I would learn to make all types of salumi and charcuterie. And, I had this little notebook where I would write the time that it took and the temperature and humidity and, of course, the recipes and ingredients and every little detail about that type of casing that we used. And all of that was written down in this little notebook that I friggin' lost. And that notebook that I lost is the catalyst that really created the idea for what Meez later became. So I thank Dan, not only for teaching me so much about salumi and letting me make mistakes and learn with him at the studio, but of course for being the impetus for what I have today with Meez. So Dan, thank you very much. Dan eventually left New York to start his first restaurant in Oxford, Mississippi, his home state. He's been nominated for James Beard Awards. He's won Gourmet Mag Best Restaurant in the South, among many other awards. But he now helps restaurants across the South build sustainable and profitable menus, and generally just helps them with their operations and helps them run really, really tight operations. Dan and I had a wide-ranging conversation where we talk about what restaurants are struggling with these days, to how to source sustainably and what the state of agriculture is in the U.S. today. We go back in time a bit and talk about life as a cook in New York City in the 90s and 2000s. He gives some tips and insights about making great salumi. And we ended the conversation talking about fly fishing, something that I've been learning a lot more about. And I think something that chefs definitely have a propensity to do. It's meditative, but it takes a lot of work. And he gave us some tips on how to start. I didn't realize that there's saltwater and freshwater fly fishing, so I'm stoked to get started. And generally just stoked about the conversation that we had. So as always, I hope you enjoy the conversation as much as I did. Welcome to the podcast, man.
Thanks. Appreciate it. Thanks for having me.
I think, Dan, there's obviously a really cool backstory with you, not just because of what you do, but a little bit of the origin story of Meez. But maybe just for the audience, I know your background, but just share a little bit about what you're doing today, and we'll probably dig a bunch into the past as well.
I started cooking about 1997, 98. I don't, those years are kind of fuzzy, but I was a little bit of a career changer. I was in the metals business, meaning I sold titanium to airplane manufacturers for fan blades, for engines. And one of the funniest things is sold a 900-pound block of titanium to the Tomahawk War missile manufacturer in Huntsville, Alabama, where they carved out the warhead and all the circuitry and the whole thing. So I was, for a long time, could never get out of my head that I wanted to own a restaurant. No idea. It was pervasive. Like, never could get it out of my head. And I was leaving a missile comp. Was
there like a bunch of restaurants in your town? Your family cook? Why restaurants?
I try to trace some of that back. My grandmother and grandfather was a war vet, drove a tank for Patton. He had a victory garden. My grandmother canned, and she had a room that looked like we could have survived till today, So it was one of those places where just really a very humble upbringing, but that would be the first interactions with food and gardening and just kind of understanding how to take care of yourself or your family. And I don't know, that obviously had some, I've never done the psychoanalysis of it all in the sense of how it came together, but I do think about piecing it together in the sense of, with my grandfather. So I grew up in Mississippi, and grandfather was a kind of mid-central Mississippi, and a lot of farms, I remember having a pig stick when I grew up, like walking around pig farms and, outdoor pig farms, and not really knowing what the hell's going on, getting knocked over, stuff like that, just a little kid.
Were those like industrial farms that around you?
No, just total local farms. And my grandfather knew the guys, and we would go pick up fatback. We'd pick up lard for cooking and things of that nature. Just very small. No, not industrial at all. We're talking local farms. So, those are early memories of food and just interacting with food. The path led me to this company was based out of New Orleans. So right out of college, lived in New Orleans, and this guy was an entrepreneur. He sold metal to all, these big ship manufacturers, airplane manufacturers. We actually sold a lot of metal to the booster rocket manufacturer out in East New Orleans. So, that was a big part of my early deal. Now, this guy had private tables at Commander's, Emerald's, all these great restaurants. So, I started to kind of see this kind of way of life and was really more interested in that than what I was doing, and just could never get it out of my head. So I was transferred to Atlanta to run the aerospace division, was working with Gulfstream, Boeing, and this missile manufacturer I was telling you about. And, I left a missile conference one day. I was like, that's it. I'm going to go figure this out. I did my research, on different schools, figured out the night program at French Culinary was probably the best way to kind of do a transition out of what I was doing into something else. Never really spent a lot of time in New York. My parents didn't travel. I went to New York on my own after college and just tried to research the school and try to figure it out. And that was it. I packed up like I was going to camp and sold everything off and got a one-way into New York and enrolled in French Culinary, and then ended up in student housing down on Henry Street in Brooklyn. That was the intro to it all. It happened pretty quick. I had a friend, Sarah Moulton, at the Food Network, and so I was able to get onto her crew which is a total rando thing. I didn't know, and I didn't have cable. I'm not into food TV at this time at all, and not into food TV still today. But it was a great paying job. Freelance cooks at Food Network at that time, it was very flexible schedule. They paid pretty well. You could come and go. I got in with those guys pretty, early, and that was my first gig while I was doing the night training. I responded to an ad in the New York Times for cooks for a restaurant called Babbo. And so I walk in and I meet Andy, I think it's Andy Nusser, who ran Babbo for a long time and then moved over to Casamano. And Andy was very kind, but looked at me like I was crazy, like no experience, like those guys were pretty hardcore at the time. And he was nice enough, but sent me on my way, told me to come back a couple of weeks, check in. So I did. I came back a couple of weeks. There's a guy sitting at the bar, and I don't know who he is. And he asked me what I'm doing, and I told him I'm looking for Andy. He says, Andy's not here. And he was like, well, what do you want? What do you need? It was Mario. And so Mario looked at my resume, and the first thing he saw is that I worked with Boeing out of Macon, Georgia. And his dad's a retired Boeing engineer. And we hit it off from there. We talked about building airplanes. We took a walk. He took me down to Poe, showed me the dark depths of the basement, and put me to work as a prep cook. That's the fast and furious of how it all came together for me to start cooking. And I spent 5 years working for those guys in New York, and ended up getting married in the city, and ended up with an amazing education with those guys. It was a very fast and furious, an amazing education early on.
So you started at Poe, and then you went to Babbo after Poe?
I never cooked at Babbo. I was in and out of there. Made all the salami for Babbo, but Babbo had they had it all wrapped up pretty. I was very intimidated by Babbo too. I got beat up at Poe most of the time. Running that place was a 3-man line, and I was young and didn't have the great experience. I wasn't that fast. Like, I got to run the line at Poe on Sundays, things of that nature, so Babbo was off limits to me. I was more of a liability than I was an asset to those guys at the time. Now, the salami we made was very well received there, and that was kind of my in. Yeah, Studio del Gusto, Italian wine merchants and Studio del Gusto opened shortly after Babbo. I think Joe needed a place to store all the wine. They had a huge wine cellar in the basement of that place. I don't know if you ever went there, but you were there. You got to see the basement.
Yeah, I think it'd be helpful to have some context here, because this is sort of where the genesis of Meez ties in a little bit. But they created this studio for creating salumi and having private dinners in this really cool wine shop called Italian Wine Merchants in Union Square. And I would love to hear how that came to be, how they ended up getting a salumi shop there. And also, how did you end up working, going from Poe to making all the salumi for all the Batali restaurants?
That transition's a little gray in my mind, but I really believe that there was a guy named Sergio who ran the place, and and he was the wine broker. He was a Sicilian guy that was very animated. And I didn't read Joe's book, but I think he gets a better description in Joe's book. But nonetheless, Mario at the time had some momentum with Food Network. I know that Viking built out the the studio with all the equipment. Salami production was based on Mario's dad retiring and wanting to open a place in Seattle, which eventually became Salumi. An amazing sandwich shop and cured meats shop in Seattle. So that was the R&D. Now, how all that happened, I think Mario just had a vision. He wanted to make all his own salami for Babbo and for other concepts that were on the table. I think Lupa came next, and then
Otto and Esca were sort of like quick to follow.
Esca, yeah, and Pasternak and that crew. But how that was synthesized, don't know. But, I do remember working with Mario's dad a lot on creating these recipes. And
did his dad come to the studio to help teach you about the recipes?
He's the one who engineered the whole room. It was the most complex humidifier and dehumidifier I'd ever seen. He had it was basically looked like I was monitoring nuclear waste or something at the moment. Remember that chart? I don't know if you remember, there was a ink-driven chart on the outside that would track the humidity of the room, temperature of the room, and you had to and that was part of the HACCP plan. We had to keep that as documentation of what was going on in that room at all time.
Yeah.
So he set all that up. Now, he was there every now and then to work with recipes and all, but, not a huge hands-on. Walter Scarborough, I don't know if you remember Walter, but he brought in his butchers from Udine to where the Bastianich vineyards are. And Walter Scarborough is he's a character for sure, but he's some of the most amazing just hard salami that I've ever had in my life. And so his guys came in and did most of the core training on how to do the production there. Yeah.
I was gonna say, I think by the time I got there, you were pretty dialed in. Like, you were running the whole shop. I think you were the only one I saw there most of the time in the kitchen.
Oh, I had a pretty good crew there. It was more part-time crew that came in. We did all kind of different wine events. A lot of finance guys came in and would rent that room. A lot of wine brokers or just people that were big into wine would come and rent the room, but mainly finance guys would come and shut that place down and, have private wine dinners.
Yeah.
I was in charge of all the dinners, and we'd have a crew that would come in and do service. I had a prep crew. I had one or two guys who would help us with salami, but no, I ran the majority of that by myself for a couple of years.
Yeah.
Which was a great setup. It fit my personality pretty well. And as a young, curious cook, the study of oil and wine, as I always say, is a pretty good way to go.
I remember just it's sort of a dream job.
Yeah, it was a dream job. Yeah. Besides dealing with some of the personalities that with some of those guys, Mario was always a very cool guy to me. Sergio, Joe, they had their own things. Those guys they're pretty hard rollers as it is. And I just kept my head down. There was not much to it. It was a great job. It wasn't that day-to-day grind of the restaurant. As I've aged, and kind of look back on owning a restaurant, running restaurants, being in restaurants, like the day-to-day of restaurants is complicated for me. Like, I don't know what it is, but it just over time grinds me out. And I don't know, I'm kind of an adrenaline junkie. So I think it's not a very good match for my personality, but it was a great place to be.
Yeah. I remember the first day I got there, it was super overwhelming, but there's so many different things you're curing. Lomo and prosciutto and coppa and pancetta and all the different sort of bacterias and things. And
that guanciale, yeah.
Guanciale. I remember I would try to reproduce versions of it at Tabla. So in the morning I would come work, for you for free, learning how to make salumi, and then I would go to Tabla around, I don't know, 11 or something to start the regular job. And Floyd would let me hang all kinds of random meats in the spice room and things like that. But there's so many things that you guys were doing that I didn't see anybody else doing in New York. How much of that training was from, Mario's dad and from the team in Italy versus how much you just sort of learned as you were sort of iterating and testing over time in the space?
What was interesting is those two camps were at odds, right? So Mario's dad was really being the engineer and having to develop a product that was going to be inspected by the USDA. He was very adamant about curing agents and using sodium nitrate and sodium nitrite. Well, number one, it's required by the USDA, and number two, it's the safest way to do it. We, on the other hand, working with the Italians, that's not part of the ingredient bank. That's kind of a no-no. Those guys from Udine come in and they've got great salt, they've got garlic, they've got white wine. They used a little bit of powdered vitamin C, which
the color
would kind of activate some and help, but that was it. A little bit of pepper. There was always some, fresh herbs that were involved, like when we would make the lardo or put the lardo under cure, but that's pretty much it. there was kind of always this debate, and it wasn't really a debate because Mario's dad was in charge of it. And, so we had to use the pink salt in order to make it. So we always kind of had two books. We'd always have this group here that was experimenting with no curing agents, and this one with curing agents. And, it was an interesting way to kind of see how they would play out. Obviously, the salamis that we would ferment, like let's just say hard salami that we would ferment with the curing agents, were always very standard. The emulsifications and the curing, what I call the particle definition of the salami was always very nice. And, you get the great color and all of these things so it definitely has its place. Just using salt and thyme, you could have some pockets that might not cure completely. So there was always kind of a variable. But for me, the flavor component of not using curing agents and just kind of the purity of it was always the goal.
Yeah.
As I continued on and opened a place in Mississippi, I continued to use a little bit of curing agents because I had to conform. I had a state inspected butcher shop where I made all the salami. So I was still under a state inspection, and that was required as well. But, with all my pancettas and guanciale and things of that nature, I never used it in the sense because it was always a long dry cure, and I could always manage the bacteria pretty well that way, just with salt.
You said they used really, really nice salt. What kind of salt did they use?
Just good sea salts, like coarse, not super coarse, but just a really nice, not even almost like a Maldon. I mean, I'm not a huge fan of Maldon. I think it's kind of processed. It's bleached out or something, but I do like the texture of it, something that would dissolve pretty easily. But the minerality of it all was, those kind of natural occurring nitrates that you would find in that was the whole idea. Is the sea salt would allow you would have enough components of the curing agents to do it. So that was, some people say use celery seed or celery salts or some kind of components of that. And I've played around with that, but never really liked the flavor components of it, but just a great sea salt.
For anybody that isn't aware of the types of curing salt, because you have intracure number 1 and intracure number 2.
Right.
Why would you use number 1 versus number 2 in terms of the curing salts if you're going to use a curing salt?
Number 1 is a faster cure. Number 2 is it's like a time release Tylenol is kind of the way I would describe it. So it's a longer acting
or harder salamis, right?
Agent. Yeah. So if you need something the hard salami that might take two months, something of that nature to truly cure, guanciale on the other hand could take 6 weeks to 8 weeks to really kind of get the liquid out of, to get the water out of the product and set it properly. But, that's the way I look at those two products.
And when they're using just naturals, like just using salt and no curing agents, is that always sort of inoculated with some sort of bacteria as well?
Well, there's never an inoculation really. It's, the fermentation side of things, meaning we would hold the product, let's just say, continuing down the road on hard salami, holding the product anywhere between 40 and 60 degrees for a day or two in order to really get the fermentation. Yeah. So yes, so the Italians would never do this, but part of what Armandino Batali would use was the milk. It's like a dextrose or a milk solid that would ferment. And that was kind of the lactic fermentation that would start and would be part of that stage when we were holding it at like I said, 50 to 60 degrees for a day or two, until we got to a certain pH, and then we would be able to go hang it. And, that's a very particular, using an alto sham or using some type of device that can hold that temperature properly in order to make it, and if it got out of temp, if it got too hot, that it would cook it. If it was too cold, it would never really activate. So it was very, it's always just this moment where you're really, having to trust it. And, but the Italians would just leave it out, right? They would, we left out multiple, when they would be in town, if they felt the meat was too cold, they would just leave it out on the table overnight and just be like, we'll deal with it when we get back in the morning. Their ideas about it were radically different from how we understand things, or not understand, but how we have to manage things differently in the United States. We had a pig farm up in Vermont, massive animals that they brought in. I'm talking, 400-pound kill weights, things of that nature. And these guys were very particular about the temperature of the meat when they were butchering it. And, it was too cold when they first arrived. So we just left them, we left these massive carcasses out on the tables overnight, while we went to find the local tavern or whatever they wanted to get into that night. But then come back in and get back after it. Anyway, sidebar.
It's a lot harder to do that in the
Yeah,
city, especially like New York City. I remember
right.
being in Emilia Romagna visiting, like Pietrelcini prosciutto, and
Yeah.
they would just have the windows open, and we would just have the
Oh, yeah.
air from the Mounties coming in and blowing all the. But I imagine that's probably why we don't make as much salumi in restaurants as you do in.
Well, it's true. I think, I think what was interesting to me, and this kind of goes back to that early memory of being on these pig farms, is that, the Southerners have always cured hams but they're heavily salted, and there's not a lot of dealing. There's not a microclimate in the South, really. You might find them in Kentucky and Tennessee up in the mountains in the Appalachians. So as I started down this path, I started to see the similarities of Italian and Southern cooking, mainly because of a regional effect in the sense of the communities and everybody having their own kind of ways of dealing with pork and how they would cure it, or whether they did fat back or not, or whether they did salted bellies, or it just so these different ways, and it's all preservation and all kind of sustenance and how to manage the lack of food in the early days before the industrialized system was rolled out for us.
Do you have any cuts or like that are your favorite to make or to eat?
Guanciale, I go back to time and time again. I can't get away from it. I mean, bucatini amatriciana is one of my favorite things in the world, and I just can't stop. It's one of those. Now, my heart doctor might tell you differently that I need to, but it's
I think I actually learned how to make bucatini alla from you. One of the first weeks I was there, I remember you slicing guanciale and never heard I didn't know what a matriciana was.
Right.
Super simple pasta, but
it is.
Yeah, pretty positive that's the first I've ever saw it.
People complicate it, but it really is just guanciale, great tomato, and a little red chili flake, and that might be up for debate among some people as well. I think some people add onion and garlic. It's kind of like what the interpretations of carbonara would be.
What makes a great guanciale? Like what in terms of process and type of pig?
I mean, obviously fat content, but also making sure you have the right fat lean content or ratios together. So if you've ever cut open a pig jowl, you know that there's a large kind of leaner portion in the middle of it. So trimming it properly to make sure, it's also got all these nodules. I don't want to be too graphic, but it's got all these nodules and kind of, it's just things that need to be trimmed away. So making sure that you can get the big jowl, that as long as it can be trimmed up and it's pretty lean and, it's not super fatty, but, I think also just time, like letting it really get to the point to where most of the liquid has come out of the tissue. We've really got a firm product. It's not, if you slice it and it's still rubbery and it doesn't have any resistance, so those components for me are really important to make sure that it's just been dried properly. And, it can go anywhere from 2 months, 3 months to really achieve the right flavor.
Yeah. Have you ever seen it smoked?
Yeah, I have. Yeah. I don't know where, but I remember seeing that at some point. Yeah. It's a lot like speck, the smoked prosciutto, but yeah, it has been. Now, that would be probably a violation of many, many codes, smoking guanciale for amatriciana. But anyway, I don't think you can do that. But no, I have seen that. And it's a good product for sure.
What else do you use guanciale for other than amatriciana?
Carbonara, not pancetta or bacon in the traditional sense.
Are you still make any cured meats today?
No, I'm not. I many years ago stopped, just kind of after L&M's, which, we had our own, so we had our own curing room and then I had that butcher shop I was talking to you about. After that, I really just kind of started to transition out of that a little bit. My desires for it and just, kind of, I didn't grow out of it, but I just, the complexity of it, I think we were talking earlier about why don't more restaurants do it? And it's space, time, education, knowledge, passive plans, it's a complex deal. Now with St. Leo, what we're doing is we're dry curing bellies and pork jowls for 7 days, and then we're slow roasting. So it's a version that I like in the sense that it doesn't take up as much space. It allows the concept to have a unique flavor profile. When the belly they use for pizza, the pig jowl that we use, I don't call it guanciale, but we call it dry cured jowl, and we use it for the carbonara. We use it for different specials and for pizza toppings. So it allows the company to have a unique product without having to dedicate too much space or time or deal with hassle plans and So that allows it. That's where I've gone.
So you cure it, and then you're just like slow roasting it, and then it holds pretty well.
Yeah, just so it gets. We slow roast it like 225 degrees for multiple hours, so it's super soft and gets a nice color, and then they're set, and so they can, we've got a pretty good 14-day shelf life on them, or even longer, and then we can just slice it when needed. From that point, render out the belly for pizza, render it out for the carbonara.
It's almost like in the style of ham.
A little bit, yeah.
Is it a wet cure or dry cure that you do on those?
Dry cure.
Gotcha.
Yeah, just a good dry rub. And that goes into some of the philosophy I use with consulting on how to create unique flavor profiles for companies and in different restaurants, like thinking about what makes something unique, what makes a concept unique, what makes your food different, in this world today where there's so much static on the market and there's so many different things, I think thinking about consumer behavior and what can trigger someone to think, wow, I've never really, what is that? Or what is that flavor? Or what is that technique on that? So I think about those types of things a lot. I read a book called The Dorito Effect. Mark, is it Schatzker? Anyway, and Mark, what was his name? Anyway, the author of that. But the Dorito Effect had a huge effect on my life in the sense of he did a huge study on how synthetics were introduced into the food world. And not only does it follow a Frito-Lay executive on creating the taco Dorito, but he goes into the story of how vanillin was created by the McCormick company, and I don't remember the year, but there was a civil war in Madagascar where they were bringing all their vanilla out of, so they were shut out of the vanilla market. So they created a machine that could mimic flavors in nature, and so they were able to create all the different synthetic compounds for vanilla, and vanillin was born, vanilla extract, and there's not one piece of vanilla, there's not 1 ounce of vanilla in any of the vanillin. It was a pretty amazing way to mimic the flavor and turned out to be an amazing product for them. Now, the flip side is that introduces to synthetics and separate us from the plant world, at which the outcomes are, I think we're still in the middle of trying to figure that out. I think we're seeing the outcomes of that now, and it's positive or not positive. It depends on where you stand on that. But I'd like to live more in the natural world. I'll just leave it at that.
What's your take on synthetic casing versus natural casing?
I'm not a fan. I think it has an application here and there, but I'm not a fan. I think natural casings are the way to go. I think I've tried synthetic casings for large format salamis that had its place, and they're easier to use, they're cheaper, they don't gross everybody out, but they're just not. They don't breathe as well. I never enjoyed working with them.
Yeah, I feel like the only time they're really helpful is things like hot dogs, where you're gonna.
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah, for sure, that's a very good point.
Are there any like charcuterie? And I'm sorry, I keep jamming on all this charcuterie stuff. Because, like I said, I lost this notebook. I still have learned, obviously, tried to recoup a lot of this knowledge over time, but I'm always fascinated by all the little intricacies. But are there any producers today that you think are doing it really well at an industrial scale?
I really appreciate it and love Paul Bertoli at Fremani. He's got a place in Berkeley that I got an early intro to him and through Bill Nyman, and was able to tour his facility really early on when they were getting cranked up, and was blown away just by he's a master, and he's not only a master at the recipe level, but what he's been able to do on this scale is very impressive. And the product is, in my opinion, just super delicious and one of the best in the United States. For prosciutto, La Corcia in Iowa, Herb Eckhouse, I think, is another master. He's an old Monsanto guy, and he spent a lot of time in Italy looking at the facilities you were talking about. And I think he was able to really mimic what he did in his factory, was mimic the 4 seasons of Parma with humidity and temperature. Now, he doesn't have the mountain air coming through and those types of components of a microclimate, but he nailed it. He makes some really delicious. Now, he's also really particular about his sourcing and where his pigs come from. And, Paul does the same. So those two would be my American.
Well,
my
Paul's
American
book,
hero. Cooking
by Hand, is, it's sort of the gold standard for.
Yeah.
I mean,
so those are my two heroes in the salami world. I was able to tour Iowa. My first introduction to it all was Bill Nyman. And I don't know if you know Bill, but Bill had Nyman Ranch for a long, long time and farmer out. And
He sold it, right?
Yeah, he did. Private equity back in the mid-90s. And when he did sell it, he ended up in Mississippi with a couple of people of the Southern Foodways Alliance and, walked through the door at my butcher shop one day. And he was on a quest to look at and possibly revitalize Southern pig farms. And we hit it off and really just, we had a great time together and just understanding, he was really the first guy that brought me into animal welfare and animal husbandry. And, Nyman Ranch had an amazing protocol for feed and breeds. And, he unlocked the whole world for me in the sense of how to understand what we're doing with animals. Took me on a tour of Iowa. And what I mean by a tour is that we got to see the whole gamut, the factory farms, the organic farms, and, looking at the comparisons, massive scale, like bacon and hot dog producers. And then people like Herb in La Quercia and then going out to see Paul, really we were in Iowa to see Paul's producers, and then made it over to Berkeley. But that insight was life-changing and understanding, what are we doing on scale with animal production and how are we going to manage it? And this was back in the 90s. So, where we've come today is even more complex. Yeah. Nyman Ranch got sold. He's got a farm in Bolinas, California that he built. He acquired it right in the 60s. He's from a grocery family like Minnesota or something like that. Anyway, he ended up in Bolinas in the late 60s and started farming, raising a few animals, got in with Alice Waters at Chez Panisse and a few of those types in the California scene in those times, and just really became well known for his attention to the animal, and that really was his ethos and still is today. The guy's just, his unbelievable wealth of knowledge and just the kindest individual you've ever met in your life, and really knows what he's doing with when it comes to grass-fed animals. That trip in Iowa was one of those things. When you think about life-changing moments in food, that was one of them. And anyway, he's a special guy in my life.
This podcast is brought to you by Meez, the culinary operating system for food professionals. As a chef and restaurant owner for the past 20 years, I was frustrated that the only technology that we had in the kitchen was financial or inventory software. Those are important, but they don't address the actual process of cooking, training, collaboration, and consistent execution. So I decided if it didn't exist, I'd do my best to get it built, so the current and next generation of culinary pros have a digital tool dedicated to their craft. If you're a chef, mixologist, operator, or generally if you manage recipes intended for professional kitchens, Meez is built just for you. Organize, share, prep, and scale your recipes like never before, and get laser-accurate food cost and nutrition analysis faster than you could imagine. Learn more at www.getmeez.com. You learned a lot about animal husbandry and sustainable farming and raising of these animals. Like, what are some of the biggest takeaways? And then where are we at today?
It's a huge subject. Let's start where I think we are today. I think that we kill a lot of animals for a lot. We have factory farming and where we are today, and that is not a sustainable model, in my opinion. I think it's run by huge corporate conglomerates, but it's necessary in order to feed the masses. But so I've gotten to the point where I'm looking at, I totally understand why we have what we have and what we're dealing with, and but the dominion over animals and the destruction of it all, and the destruction of the environment and what we're dealing with is pretty horrific. And if you've ever been into a major large slaughterhouse, you'll understand that it is not a sustainable model over time. I think it's been able to exist through subsidies and exist because the demand is there. What we have to deal with is consumer behavior. Moving to a model of more regenerative practices and working with animals and going back to a more local agrarian world that we had before the industrialization after World War II is that it's complex, but the consumer behavior is not there anymore. The consumer is it goes to the synthetics. I believe that the consumer has been haven't been hoodwinked. They still have free will. They still have the choices to make on what they want to consume, but fat, salt, all of the above has created an addicted population that is really into fast, cheap meat. They don't fully understand what it goes into the whole production of animals and the slaughter of these animals. We're killing billions of animals annually in order to fuel in my opinion, really bad diets, and really, we're in trouble with that. So I think that there's some place we're going to have to find some compromises between both camps. I know that I'm not a perfect consumer, and I know that becoming a perfect consumer is very complex. How do you get people to kind of change the way they think about consuming animals and meat? As I've aged, I don't eat as much red meat as I used to, and I try to think about that. But I also, my insight into it is very, very different. I've seen all of it, and I know what it takes to raise them. I know what it takes to kill them. I know what it takes to package them and move it around. It's a pretty complex system. But
Well, I mean, what are the biggest differences between massive scaled industrial farming, for example, of a pig, and slaughtering that to the ideal state that someone like Bill Lyman would recommend?
I think that when you understand how in an industrial manner, how they're raised and how it just becomes a number, man. If you've ever been in a large pig facility, it's hell on earth. It's something very, very difficult to describe in the sense of, it's a very visceral experience in the sense of like, it's not even real in my, and it's hard to kind of explain here, but not only the smell, but the homogeny of the animals in the sense of how everything's been bred to be the same. It's like Frankenmeat, man. I mean, it's very, very, I don't know if you've ever seen a load of chickens going down the highway, but, they're all very much, half of them don't have feathers. They all look like shit. They're all stressed out, so it's this industrial system. It takes nothing into account of life or nature. It's just a number, and it's just to get it through the system in order to get it processed, put it in a bag, and get it out to the market, right? The other side of it is a very caring situation to where it's not the animal, it's the process, right? So the animals never leave the farm. Ideally, the abattoir would be close to the farm or on the farm. There's a great example down in South Georgia here called White Oak Pastures, where he partnered with Whole Foods. They built an abattoir on the farm. Now, it can't manage his capacity, so he has to use outside slaughter, and that's where we get into this tricky situation of the bottleneck of slaughter. But when I go through the slaughter with his people in his group, I don't know how to explain it except that there's a care for the animal. There's actually a respect for that life. Everybody on that floor is attached to that animal, and they know it. And so the community builds around this production model, and so they all understand it. So there's just a respect for life and not in a very disregard for life on this side. So once you see the two operations side by side, it's real easy to kind of say to understand that, in my opinion, we're in trouble. We've lost this complete disregard for the animal and what it really means to take it from birth to life and consumption.
I've only ever seen the small scale things like Righteous Organics up here in upstate and things. I've never seen one of these industrial farms, but terrified to see what it looks like. Do you think that there's more small scale farming happening? Is that growing, or is it?
I do. I think it's very challenging. I think that by design, most of the slaughter was the biggest bottleneck is slaughter in these. And so there's a lot of people raising animals and that are really interested in regenerative agriculture and rebuilding kind of the soil and rebuilding these communities around it. And that's all well and good, but until you go try to figure out how to get it killed and processed. And, we've been going down this path of, we being my partner, I've started a new company called Able Pastures, which is animals benefiting local economies. And we're just dipping our toe into kind of like, how do we become more involved in working to help fuel this regenerative movement and really kind of think about how do we get back to more of an agrarian society with local slaughter and things of this nature. And we've been doing it for years, but the slaughter component is such a problem. It's not done effectively. It's usually very expensive. There's backlogs. The farmers just don't have the access. So, it creates these bottlenecks and creates this kind of really major price difference between commodity and local that most of the consumers can't absorb. I think that there are more well-intended individuals in the space that are really pushing to bring, if you look at your local farmers markets, I buy from multiple different people, and the number one complaint is just backlog and slaughter, or this is happening because, I think raising animals and being regenerative and these things they're not easy, but they're pretty well established on how to do it. And if you got a if you've got your mind around it, raising animals can be pretty easy. Now, then it just becomes this bureaucracy of how to get product to market. They're great groups. I think the Savory Institute with their new land to market initiative is really helping. I think that we're starting to see more and more investments in regional slaughterhouses. So I think that we're on to something. I think it's just a very incremental type of change. It's like turning a tanker ship or something, it's just like very slow. I've had my toe in this from the beginning, from when I left New York and opened L&M's and we had multiple pig farms. I worked with Jim and Nick's big barbecue chain down in the South that, we had pigs on farms across Tennessee, Alabama, Georgia, Mississippi, working with the Amish and trying to make that work. But the slaughter was it's horrific. I mean, you're dealing with guys that you've got one or two guys that know how to do it. It's very complex. They just don't have the right packing facilities. A lot of them are not USDA, so you can't move product across state lines, things of that nature.
So is there anyone trying to disrupt the slaughterhouse?
That's a good question. I don't, right out the top of my head, I couldn't name. I think that there are collectives that I know of. There's one big group out of creating one. Well, in my neck of the woods at the Alabama-Georgia border, there's a new slaughterhouse coming on board. So I think there are a few people that are, and it's not only capital, but it's also government. You have to be well connected or with the right people in the USDA in these communities in order to get it done. There are signs of life. I think that's definitely, it's going in the right direction. But again, the consumer behavior, if that changes and all of a sudden everybody's like, I'm going to stop eating commodity chicken from whatever grocery store you want to use, then things could shift, right? So I think that's a bigger process or a bigger program, that needs to be dealt with. And I don't know how you do it. Changing consumer behaviors, is a fascinating study. I don't know where I don't know how we do it at this point to where, food is super cheap. It's convenient. Fast food is rampant. I'm not knocking fast food. It has its place, but does it? What are we doing? I think that, restaurants have the ability to really be change agents because of they're just on the ground, and that's the first point of interaction. And if we have incremental changes there, if most of these restaurants I'm not talking fast food, I'm talking just got mom and pops. If everybody starts to have a little bit of a local spend that they, part of what I try to help restaurants do is dedicate a portion of the budget to local spend, whether it's weekly or monthly, whatever you can do to, mainly vegetables. If you can, get into buying ground beef or ground lamb, ground chicken, ground pork from your local guys, that's a good way to do it. Make a bolognese that way, or, just start with $150 a week, whatever it is, in order to create a local spend and start to build those relationships and get some of the money back into the community. It helps, I think, talking about another group out of right south of Memphis called Home Place Pastures. They just built an abattoir on their farm and are really growing. They're doing well too. They're growing and getting momentum. But man, it's a beat down on those guys capital wise and trying to find the right labor to look. Working in slaughterhouses, you think working in a restaurant is a beat down. Think about the slaughterhouse life. I mean, dude, you go into these large slaughterhouses and there's one person per muscle. I mean, you've got carcasses going around, there's tens of thousands of carcasses going down a line. You got one guy knocking out one muscle, making a cut. And it's a horrific work site.
The idea of effectuating changes with something so scaled seems impossible. But I wonder if, the larger groups like McDonald's or even like Chick-fil-A had some sort of decentralization policy that they started to use, kind of like how Whole Foods does, where, each region of Whole Foods is sort of decentralized in how it's run. And if McDonald's, they have capital, they said, okay, let's do a test market in Memphis and have a localized version of McDonald's where they're not using everything that's sort of standardized. And just
what I see on that is you'll see initiatives from, especially like I've seen it with Tyson, I've seen it with Cargill. They're investing in plant-based. They're investing in different types of products. Well, when I mean plant-based, you'll see the Tyson's invested in plant-based chicken nuggets, things of this nature. That doesn't really necessarily deal with the slaughter that we're talking about, but I do believe it's a lot like Shell investing in solar, right? They're having to really manage how they're perceived. I think if you're looking at ESG scores and we're talking about if capital is going to be available to these guys, they're going to have to get on board with some of the more modern ways of doing business. And I think I think you're definitely going to see that. Now, whether they want to invest in some local slaughter, I don't know, but it could be interesting in order for them. I think regenerative is a word.
How do you define that? How do you define
Personally,
regenerative?
it's a method that is used on farms. I think about it in the way that animals are used to improve topsoil. And so it's a regenerative methods of working animals. It's a rotational grazing method that allows for the topsoil to be reignited and into a point to where natural grasses and the natural flora can come back through the turning of the soil, the introduction of animal waste into the soil. It's just a constant working of the soil. Now you're allowing the soil to be worked, you're adding to the topsoil, and you're rebuilding the natural, whether it's savanna in your area, whatever region you're in. Going back to White Oak Pastures, that farm went fully organic, meaning no pesticides, no herbicides in 1993. At that point, they do it and they measure it in inches of topsoil. So they had, let's just say they had that 1 inch of topsoil when they started. Today they have 5, so it's what happens when you do that is you have water retention, you have the natural grasslands come back, but the water retention is the most important component of this. And so, we're dealing in a world of climate hysteria right now in the sense of what are we going to do about it? Well, one of the biggest things is that we can use these animals to restore this topsoil properly in order to retain more water and have climate stability. That's the way I look at regenerative farming, is using animals in order to restore topsoil properly. That hoofed animals have been on the planet well before we even thought about being here. And hoofed animals were a major component of how to stabilize climate for so long. If you look at Alan Savory and his work with the Savory Institute, they've turned some very crazy, they call it the desertification of land. I mean, they've turned some crazy deserts into beautiful oases by massive herds of animals. And so animals aren't the problem, our processes are, and the way that what we're dealing with and how we're doing it. So that I think about regenerative that way. I think it's it's using the life cycles, nature cycles, and water, carbon, all properly in order to generate food. And if you can have a thoughtful, regenerative nature to it, then we're in a better place.
Yeah. Well, you mentioned plant-based, but curious if there's been this over-index on getting plant-based products because of how industrialized animal farming has become, and if there was other end of the spectrum, we're not going to be interacting with animals at all as it relates to our food system. But I wondered if this was able to be improved and there was more regenerative farming and there was more small farms, that we would actually find a nice place in the middle where there wasn't such a, to your point, almost like this war on eating meat.
I think there is a camp that there's a war on nature. I think that there's a lot of capital that's been invested in plant-based, and if plant-based is really plant-based, then yes, I can get on board. But when it's frankenfood and it's heavily chemically laden or just overly salted, it's not the way to go, in my opinion. There's plenty of ways to make a veggie burger with mushrooms and quinoa and different components, lentils and versus mass subsidized fermented soybean.
I have to imagine when you're growing acres and acres and acres and acres of soybean, that everything else, there's probably a bunch of pesticides that are killing everything else other than the soybeans. I want to sort of wrap up here with a little bit of how you're helping small restaurants in your area, and then I want to touch a little bit on some fly fishing.
That's the most important. We should have started with all of that. My philosophy is simplify. I work a lot with startups. So if you're a startup organization and working with us, we're really about putting systems in place. So when you open, everything is costed properly. Obviously, Meez comes into play here and really has been a great tool for us on that. We hand over a suite of tools in order for you to operate your restaurant. So your inventory is all ready to go. Your menu's costed out. You've got a recipe database. It's functional. Your vendor maintenance is in place. And so that's a big part of our startup tool we use. And I want to hand it off to the ownership and to the management. And a lot of times we'll stay on board. And, like St. Leo, I've been there 7 years, right? So we have a monthly retainer that we keep the recipe database up. We do 6 menu changes a year. Those are the core fundamentals. Now, if you have a triage situation, I've got a team of chefs that can come with me and we can really help. So there's just kind of, those are layered services. Triage means like your food cost is completely out of whack. You don't know what's going on. Your supply chain's really been, you just don't know, right? So we come in and kind of help organize all of those things, get it into the right place. Again, Meez. Those are the main functions. I think how much of this can you get into, help people if they're interested in working more with local, help them get into the local farmers markets, understand, like, look, running a restaurant and using local can be complex. You got to be pretty flexible with your menu. You got to kind of know what you're doing with the product. Things like pizza, hamburgers, those are great components because you can use a ton of arugula for a pizza topping. You can use eggplant for pizza topping, so you can buy 5 pounds, it can go a long way on pizza. So it's an easy way to do it. That's the long and short of it, man. We're really about using data to help you with menu strategy. We look at a lot of your sales. We try to help just simplify and bring some calm to your chaos in a lot of ways.
What are the biggest struggles that you're seeing with these restaurants when you come on board? Are there any common themes around things that they have the biggest challenges
Well,
with?
I mean, since COVID, it's been labor and not just labor cost, but finding people that are interested in cooking and that have the curiosity. I think those early days in New York, I think watching Wiley DeFrino on one of your podcasts, talking about the crazy curiosity among cooks, and that really resonated. That I think, we all grew up in that time where we were all very curious and open learners. And, I think that's a big miss right now we're not seeing that. So finding competent or just people that really care and want to learn something. Obviously, inflationary pressures have caused major concerns among a lot of these restaurants, especially fast casual, where the margins are already super tight on how to just really dial it in and get the kind of understand how to deal with it. Because it's not just core food costs, it's paper costs. Everything across the board has been up for we're probably in almost 2 years now. So those are the two main components that we really work on.
Do you find that when you start working with a restaurant that they're aware of their actual food costs, or do you have to help them kind of get
crazy enough? No, it's kind of nuts to me, but not really, not to the granular level that it should be. What I mean by that is what everything on that plate cost and the yield components of everything. And that, and obviously that takes years and years of kind of just understanding what you're doing, but no, they don't. I think we've been able to save a lot of companies money in the sense of just by organization of the data and getting the menu priced properly. Yeah, that's a huge part of what we do. All right, on to fly fishing, because that's one of the more important. Look, man,
I didn't know this, but I didn't realize how much you were into it. I didn't know that you changed the name of your business because
I
of
did.
it. But I want to hear about that, but I also want to hear how do you get into it, because
all right.
I want to
so I've always been a fisherman. I grew up in Mississippi and just I had access to fishing. I was always into it, and it's a big part of my life. When I lived in New York, I met a guy named David Collier who had a summer house with my wife out in Amagansett. I had no business being in a summer. Let's just make it clear. I'm a cook in New York. I don't have a summer house in Amagansett. I'm not doing that. Now I was able to go and hang out a little bit. And so I became friends with this guy, Dave. Dave had a boat in Montauk and it was an expert fly caster fisherman. Unbelievable dude. And he needed somebody to help him with the boat. He didn't have anybody to fish with or go out and, work, just kind of manage the boat. And I was like, I'll do that all day long. So any free time I had, I was running to Montauk and meeting him. And man, during the springtime and there's a little place right outside of East Hampton Harbor. There's a beach called Sammy's Beach, where I first learned that the striped bass in April and May come in and they eat little sand eels, and you can fly fish for them. And so I got on the bow of that boat, started figuring out how to do it. He taught me some basics on casting, presentation, just kind of terminal tackle, all of this stuff. And I was hooked. I never looked back. And from that day, it's been a crazy passion, it's a practice in a lot of ways, but also a crazy pursuit. And so the fly fishing world breaks down to this. You've got saltwater fly fishing and trout fishing. I do both. I prefer to kind of the bigger game and the bigger tackle for saltwater. And I think you were talking about different chefs, at the time, like Calicchio, Cherry Heffernan, those two were the main guys that I would see out there. Now I think, Chang's into it. I think there's a lot of different chefs, and we should figure out how to put this into the Meez community and figure out I don't know what it is about chefs, the fly fishing, because it's all the terminology, the technical side of it, all the knots, all the, with trout fishing, the entomology, with the bugs and so, and why I changed the name of my company was, I was using all these great guides and their local knowledge and their local insight to the environments resonated with me on what we do inside restaurants and inside the industry. And so I really felt like Culinary Guide Shop would be a great way to kind of have a nod to both. Right. And so, I really appreciate what those guides do and how much time they spend in these environments. And they know all the little things about it. Right. So I fish a lot in Louisiana and it's a huge marsh. It's a huge fishery. And so these guides know very much about like particular times of the year, like the migratory patterns, where are they spawning, where are they, what are these fish doing? And, they start to, you kind of study that and they understand it. And that really resonated with me. So it never ends, man. Once you're in it, it's a lifelong pursuit, or it is for me. Now, how do you get involved? How do you start? I would say that, finding a guide so first of all, if you want to do it saltwater, you're in an amazing place. You can fish anywhere on Long Island. You can go, during the fall, Brooklyn, there's a great striped bass run that comes through Brooklyn. You can go out. I've got a good number of guides I can hook you up with, and you just got to go out there and cast and eventually hook one and then figure it out. It's practice on that stuff. A lot of the guides they've got all the rods and all the gear that you don't have to gear up early. You can work with a guide to do that and then figure out
Yeah. I didn't even realize it was saltwater fly fishing. When I think of fly fishing, I think of like in little creeks and upstate.
Yeah, and that's a huge part of it. It really is. I'm just not that. I'm not really into. I'm just never that. I haven't really been into that. I am now. I do some trout fishing, but I don't. I'm telling you, the saltwater fly fishing for me is the way to go. It's just look, bigger tackle, bigger fish. Just I like that component of it.
Well, I'm going to hit you up for those guides, but for those of us that don't know, that they can't hit you up. How does somebody get started with fly fishing?
Well, I think decide where you want to go. Now, saltwater fly fishing's a big jump. I think if that's something you want to pursue, then like I said, go find a saltwater guide and go and tell them. Be honest with them, like, hey, I'm a newbie. I need to learn how to do this, and they're gonna take you out, and you're gonna learn how to cast, and you're gonna hopefully try to get into a situation, especially where you are. There's in the fall, the striped bass just all pod up together. There's massive runs. So if you can get close and if you can cast, you can catch one, then you can kind of figure out how to line management, what are you doing with the rod, all of these components. And eventually you'll end up, into a knot. Now, if you want to start with the trout fishing, the same thing, go find a place you like and find a good guide and just start.
What do you use as bait when you're doing trout fishing?
Using flies that mimic whatever the hatch would be that day, or grubs or nymphs, or it's all different flies based on what's happening with whatever. It's regional, but it's also just kind of what's the hatch of the day.
Yeah. And for the stripers, you're using the sand eels?
At certain times of the year, yes. If not, it's basically like bait fish patterns. So anything look like a little minnow of some sorts, things like that. But yeah, and then you get into fly tying.
How often are you
I try to fish as much as I can. No, I don't. The saltwater I can do probably like 5 to 10 days a year right now, something of that nature. But, I've got access to bass ponds. And so I try to fish as much as I can. If I'm in a place where I take the rods are in the car.
That's what's fly tying?
Well, it just, now you start to get into your whole, you're tying your own flies and so you're tying, I tie all my patterns that mimic shrimp or bait fish. You can try crab patterns for certain things. And so you're basically you're sitting at your desk and you've got a little dice and all your components, the feathers and synthetic materials, and you're tying the flies. So it all becomes one. So with fly fishing, it's tying all your knots. It's creating all the terminal tackle, meaning tying your backing to the reel, your fly line to the backing, all your leaders to the fly line. So, creating all those connections, and then eventually figuring out how to tie your fly. So you're 100% self-sufficient in how it all works, right? It just becomes this crazy, like, hobby, passion, whatever you want to call it. It's just this never-ending pursuit. It's a practice in the way I think about it.
Yeah. It just seems so meditative.
And so when you're trout fishing, you're out. There's an old saying, trout don't live in ugly places. And so you're out in the woods, you're out in the mountains, wherever it might be, and it's really never ending. Now, I would say that just be prepared. It's like it's a never ending kind of deal. Sometimes it really works out and you catch a lot of fish, sometimes not. You just need to be prepared that it's a lifelong pursuit. It's not just this moment in time where everything's going to work out and the weather's going to be great and you're catching fish all the time. Like, you have to, I think being an angler or being a fisherman first really helps, because if that resonates with you, then, this is just an extension of it. It's just it just becomes more, it's just the more detailed.
Are your kids fly
They
fish?
like to fish. They're not into fly fishing. One likes to fish. They're not into fly fishing. They're getting old enough where I think I'm going to try to get one of them to try. I started a fly fishing tournament down in Venice, Louisiana, every December, the first weekend in December. And this is our third year, and it's a tournament among friends. I'm trying to grow it into a bigger, and maybe that's where the chefs can all come. We can put that on the Meez community. But it's a place where like-minded people can come together that really like to fish, and I'll try to get my kid to catch one this year on the fly rod. The coordination and understanding of how the rod works, and it takes some time on that.
Yeah. Are there any good online resources for learning more about this?
Yes, there's tons of information. I think if you want to learn about Orvis would be a place that has fly fishing schools all over the country. I've not ever used one, but that could be a good place to kind of start, especially in New York, upstate New York, Pennsylvania. There's some great trout fishing in that area. And then the saltwater side where you are. I mean, you're 2.5 hours from one of the greatest fisheries in the world, which is Montauk. Really unbelievable. When you look at Gardiner's Island and Shelter Island and Plum Island and those areas around the tip of Montauk, I mean, unbelievable fishery.
All right, well,
we'll leave it there. So let's get it on the community. I'd love to do that. If we can get a group of people together.
Well, I'm gonna hit you up about that. Yeah,
there's something about chefs. I think this has been on my mind for a while. There's something that must drive chefs to it. I don't know what it is, but it's something about whether it's all the technical side of it, the entomology, or if it's just all the knots and all the little things that have to be dealt with fly fishing. There's something about it, but I'd like to get a group together, a group of chefs. And maybe it's down in Venice where we like to, because the big part of it is cooking at the end of the day.
Yeah, I mean, what better than that? Hopefully catch some
fresh
fish and then cook it.
Striped bass, a day of you catch is one of the most delicious things in the world.
Oh yeah, man,
it's really good. Hey, I really appreciate having me.
Yeah, this was awesome. Man. I really appreciate it.
Thank you for the time.
Thanks for tuning into the Meez podcast. The music from the show is a remix of the song Art Mirror by an old friend, hip hop artist Fresh Daily. For show notes and more, visit getmeez.com/podcast. That's GETMEEZ.com/podcast. If you enjoyed the show, I'd love it if you can share it with your fellow entrepreneurs and culinary pros, and give us a 5-star rating wherever you listen to your podcasts. Keep innovating, don't settle, make today a little better than yesterday, and remember, it's impossible for us to learn what we think we already know. See you next time.